Hello, class. This week we are again visiting Southern literature, another master of the Southern short story, Flannery O'Connor. You are reading two selections from Flannery O'Connor. A Good Man is Hard to Find and Good Country People. Those are two of her most famous stories. She is a master of what is commonly referred to as the Southern grotesque. You also will hear it referred to as the Southern Gothic. This is a literary motif, a subgenre, if you will, primarily in short fiction, though not exclusively in short fiction, certainly. It also occurs in novels, where a character, usually one character in the story, exhibits profound or severe physical deformities or other maladies. Oftentimes, that character also exhibits some form of, for lack of a better word, gender bending, where that character exhibits strong characteristics of the opposite gender. And by virtue of that, of course, there's a lot of attention called to that character, and that character has a lot to do with the overall theme of the story. In terms of the takeaway that the reader has, often there is this notion of a redemptive quality, or particularly you will notice in Flannery O'Connor's work, often a very Christ-like quality. So you will see that sometimes in the Southern grotesque, and I'll invite you to look for that and think about that as you read the stories this week, and as you reflect on the stories you have read, also from Eudora Welty and from William Faulkner. Flannery O'Connor is a very interesting character. She is from the Deep South, from a little town called Milledgeville, Georgia. She completed her MFA in creative writing. That's a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, which at the time when she did that in 1947 was one of the most famous writers' workshops in the country, and it remains that today. If you are good enough to be accepted into the University of Iowa Writers Workshop and get a degree from there, you are quite a fine writer indeed. After that, she traveled to New York for a couple of years. She wrote early drafts of the novel Wise Blood and other stories as well. And then she became very sick. She contracted lupus, which is an autoimmune disorder. We know very little about lupus today. There's no cure today. And of course, back in the early 1950s, it was an even more mysterious disease. But it really causes havoc on the body. And she moved back home to Milledgeville, Georgia, and lived in her ancestral home. You can visit that home today. It's open as a tourist location, a tourist spot, if you will. But she wrote from there, and these two stories were penned during her time in Milledgeville, Georgia, writing from her ancestral home. Flannery O'Connor, in some respects, I think regarded herself as a freak, and I put that in scary quotes here, quotation marks, a freak. And I think that's why her stories are so imbued with the notion of the freak or the grotesque character. She had a real affinity for that, I think, based upon her own life and how people viewed her. I think she internalized that. So there is some notion there, I believe, in these stories of that quality in her own life, and she certainly had an affinity for it in terms of writing about it and being able to express a takeaway to her reader based on that. Flannery O'Connor was also very Catholic. You will see religious imagery appear from time to time in her stories. Also, you can read her stories, and some scholars, particularly Robert Brinkmeyer, who was one of my professors when I was an undergrad at Tulane, wrote a book on that about Catholic writers of the modern South, and certainly Flannery O'Connor is one. You can read her stories in a very Catholic way, in a very religious way. You can look for the Christ figure. You can look for the redemptive figure. And I'll invite you to do that. That's a very acceptable way to read and to criticize her stories. But what I want you to look for this week is really to play around with this notion of the grotesque character. It is something that is a hallmark of Southern literature of this period. A number of writers engage in grotesque fiction, or the Southern Gothic, as it is also called, up until this day, as I indicated, with gritlit writers like Harry Crews and others. So the prompt is in Moodle. I'll expect that you read that. If you have any questions, you certainly may email me about it. And I will return the email or get in touch with me via email during my stated office hours so that I can email with you more contemporaneously than maybe a few hours later, or later that day, or even the next day. So this is simply a reflection piece. This is not an essay. It's not a long essay. I will look at, obviously your grammar and syntax and things of that nature. But what I really wish for you to explore is this notion of the grotesque character. You do not have to select necessarily a character from Flannery O'Connor's works. You could select a character from Welty or from Faulkner's works. But I want you to delve into that character and follow that prompt closely in Moodle in terms of how to craft or write your essay in terms of what I'm looking for. This will conclude really our study of Southern Lit. I wish we could have the whole semester to talk about it because there's a lot we could do, and certainly we could trace this notion of the grotesque character all the way through Southern literature up until the current time. And that's a fascinating exercise. So when you read literature from now on, I'll invite you to look for that, particularly when you read Southern literature. It's not always present, but it is a motif that recurs with a great degree of frequency in Southern literature, both of this period, the modern period, and also much more contemporary Southern literature. So you do not have a discussion board this week. I wish for you to focus on the reflection piece, reread some of the stories if you need to, dig into those stories, think about this prompt, and work hard this week on your reflection piece so there is no discussion board. So I'll look forward to receiving those reflection pieces and grading them and getting those back to you. If you have any questions, please holler, send me an email.